Is for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Never comes again, another day like yesterday. Is for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.
Good morning, everybody. I recently, I think last week, did podcast number 38 called Women Are Not More Empathetic Than Men, a defense of women as normal human beings. And what could possibly be an inflammatory podcast, I argued that it has been abusive, negligent, and limiting to women. The amount of idealization we apply to women, it's a very primitive, socially self-serving ideals that we apply to women, that we say, oh no, we're being kind, we believe in women, but we apply these like incredibly dehumanizing ideals that mothers are, a font of infinite patience, and that everything they do is done with deep love, and blah blah blah. And this is just a fat load of crap. And at the beginning, you might be like, oh, well, you're just trying to take away, women are already abused and neglected and ignored. You're just trying to take away something nice that we say about women. But idealizing a human being is not nice. It traps people in a box, and it traps human beings into situations where if they don't happen to have propensities in that direction, they have to lop off psychological and emotional limbs in order to satisfy that expectation. And something that's really hard, it was really hard for me when I started my own work, and I know that it's really hard for other people, is in families with abusive parents or emotionally immature parents who are extremely emotionally immature, there's something that's called splitting, in which, in a self-serving way, an emotionally immature and unstable parent will idealize some kids or one child and demonize the other child, and project all of their fears and shame and negativity and judgment onto one child, and then they'll idealize the other child. Having been the no good child myself, I know it was really hard for me to accept that what was done to my sibling who was idealized was equally abusive and negligent, that person was not seen, was not heard, was forced into a situation where they had to satisfy these extreme, unrealistic behaviors and expectations that were equally self-denying. And that it's really unhealthy and really not good. And at the very bottom of it, leaves that person feeling loyal to someone who is extremely self-serving and toxic. Whereas if you're the no good child, you at least have a pretty obvious reason to be like, fuck this person. They treated me like shit my whole life. The person who's idealized has a really hard time with that. It's much harder to see. So there's a greater danger in it, though they may not experience the level of toxicity, the immediate or obvious toxicity. And society will certainly validate them being loyal to the toxic parent. So that's what the podcast was about. It was about normalizing women as just human beings, like allowing them to be aggressive, allowing them to be violent, admitting that women are as full of rage as often as anyone else is, and that they have good reason to be full of rage. But that doesn't change the fact that they can be abusive, that they instigate domestic violence, they can be verbally incredibly abusive, and we've normalized that. As long as it's a woman abusing a man, we just act like, well, happy wife, happy life. It's like, no, that's bullshit. That's just a cover for domestic violence and abuse and control. But we refuse to call it that because we demand that women inhabit this incredibly unrealistic, dehumanizing idealization, especially once they become mothers. And of course, there probably is a propensity maybe there is a propensity for women to be more nurturing in certain ways, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not getting into that conversation because I'm not a biologist and I don't specialize in gender. So that was the context of that conversation, but I'm coming back on it and doing a very brief follow-up. We can call it in defense of women as normal human beings, because the point that occurred to me that inspired the podcast, I forgot to make in the podcast. And so I went off on this huge rant about stereotypes, and it went into, stereotypes about Black people, about white people, about Jews, about so it ended up expanding to the whole thing about how gross and weird it is and how damaging it is that we need to build a box in our head prior to experiencing someone, and then we apply that box to them rather than listening and being present to who they are as an individual. Right, so I went on that rant and then I forgot to make the point. This point that I'm going to make may be part of the reason why, I'm making the argument that we idealize women because we want to use them and we back them into a corner into satisfying this ideal because it serves society, even if it's not good for individual women who may not be nurturing or may not be empathetic, who may be aggressive, but that aggression could be used in a good way, the way we use men's aggression sometimes. Or a woman may have a propensity for violence, but we use that when men do. Men's sports are largely, partially an expression of aggression, if not sometimes controlled violence. And it's fine, right? But with women, we feel all weird and disturbed the idea that a woman as a human being would have violent tendencies. So the point that I left out was, and this goes back to the conversation about sympathy versus empathy, was that maybe part of the reason we're so convinced that women are more empathetic than men is because we associate emotional expression with empathy. And that is just incorrect. Feeling emotional about something does not indicate empathy in any way, shape, or form. It just means you feel something about something. And that can be sympathy, right? So I talked about that, the limits of sympathy, why you'll see besties, best friends forever in middle school or high school have these massive fallings out. Because when we're children, a lot of our relationships are based on sympathy, meaning you hate the people I hate, you love what I love, you do the same thing, you went to band camp, I went to band camp, you're a jock, I'm like, whatever it is. And so there's sort of this unspoken contract that we're the same tribe, and that's why we love each other. But that's sympathy. That's feeling what the other person feels. That's not empathy. Feeling what the other person feels, or just having a feeling about what someone else is experiencing, doesn't mean that you're empathetic. Now, this might sound nuts. You're like, well, what the hell are you talking about? What's empathy then? What's giving a crap about other people then? It's subtle. So let's do an extreme thought experiment, and I'll show you how having an emotional response to someone else having an experience does not indicate empathy at all. And this may be where, if women have been socialized to feel more comfortable being emotionally expressive, we're like, oh, well, they're more empathetic. And it's like, no, that does not track. Let's take an extreme example. Let's take borderline personality disorder. Both men and women have this. This is tracked more with women, again, because maybe when men are borderline, they behave physically violently and they go to prison. There's tons of male borderlines in prison. And so maybe we experience more women borderline. But borderline personality disorder is, look, everyone has abandonment issues. Everyone gets out of control sometimes. Everyone dates a toxic person because we're afraid of being alone. But borderlines are at an extreme where their own perception of their own value is so unstable that it's literally created by the people they attach to. If their boss likes them one day, they totally feel like a valid human being. If their boss just not dislikes them, not even criticize them, just pays attention to a different employee the next day, suddenly they're completely unstable and irrational and feel totally abandoned and suddenly resort to extreme behaviors to correct this and will be manipulative and will attempt to sabotage that other employee in ways that are fairly significant, right? So this is a problem with the DSM and with psychology is as this stuff spreads out into the zeitgeist and the public awareness, people start diagnosing themselves all the time. People constantly are like, am I bipolar? Because it used to be that we called it, what do we call it? Manic depressive, which means like, well, I swing back and forth. It's like, just because sometimes you're depressed and then sometimes you're happy and you can't tell why does not make you bipolar 1. This is not to judge or criticize bipolar 1. Bipolar 1 is a very challenging mental health disorder where when they're in the manic phase, they may go without sleeping or with only 1 or 2 hours of sleep for 1 or 2 weeks. And they may engage, and they are so high and so driven on their brain supply, they may do extreme things like suddenly someone who's happily and loyally married will go out and just start sleeping with random people because they're so driven to just sexually have, and they just feel so beautiful and so amazing, and they just feel so entitled. Or they may take all of the family savings and their children's college funds and they'll go to Vegas because they'll be like, I figured out the system and I'm going to triple my money, and they'll just go blow all of their money. This isn't just like, oh, you have mood swings. This isn't even like, oh, you have fairly significant mood swings. Bipolar 1 is a completely, until it's medicated and someone learns and develops coping mechanisms. I had a professor who said people with bipolar 1 end up in a psychiatric hospital or prison or jail. Usually that's when they get diagnosed of like, oh my, like something really serious is going on here, right? So borderline personality is the same thing. Everyone has a somewhat inconsistent view of self and our own value, and we might feel really good and be a little high when we get a promotion or we fall in love, and when that person leaves us, we might feel a little suicidal. We're like, oh my God, I feel like I'm borderline personality. No, you have no idea. Someone who's full on borderline personality is locked into extreme emotional responses to whether they are validated by someone outside of them or not. And it's almost like there's almost nothing they can do about it. And they will behave in sociopathic ways to alleviate the extremity of that emotional experience they're having. The most extreme experiences, I think, was Susan Smith was one. There's 2 stories, I forget which was which. One was a woman who broke up with her boyfriend, put her kids in their car seats and drove her car into a lake and attempted to drown herself and her kids. And I think one of her kids, like, I don't remember. And another one was had a husband who said, I'm really stressed out. I never wanted kids. I think I want out of the marriage. And so the woman drowned her kids in the tub. You understand the difference between you having, a really hard year after someone breaks up with you and borderline personality disorder? You understand the difference, the extremity of it, right? So borderline personality disorder, a very unstable sense of self. It's so severe and so catastrophic for that person that someone paying attention to them can literally make them feel on top of the world. And someone looking the other way and not paying attention to them for a couple hours can plunge them into desperation. And once they realize that that person is withdrawing, let's say it's a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or let's say it's their husband who's had it with the chaos and whatever, and just goes, I can't take it, I'm leaving. A borderline will be sociopathically punishing, sometimes for years or decades or for life. They will obsess over punishing that person. They just can't let it go, because their desperation is this person provides me my sense of self. They're not conscious of that, but their ability to feel stable and to engage life and to enjoy food and sex and to feel good about themselves and be a parent, all of this entirely depends on whether the person that they've targeted as, you are my anchor, you must create my sense of self, is all wrapped up in that person. So if that person is like, I'm just a human and I'm out of here, this is nuts, the borderline feels like you have done the most evil thing you could possibly do, and they will never stop punishing that person until they find a new obsession, right? So unstable sense of self, it creates really unstable relationships, because they'll be super intense and black and white in a relationship. They're married to someone, their partner has to work a lot and is not very available for a couple months, and they will just be raging and angry and punishing and accusing them of cheating. And maybe that person is exhausted trying to put food on the table and has to travel and just like hates it and wishes they could be home. But instead of getting support from their partner's literally attacking them. I know you're cheating on me, you piece of shit. Well, right? That's borderline personality disorder. That's what's going to happen. So they have very unstable relationships, and it takes a severely codependent person to stay in relationship to that person. God, you guys, it's nuts. I end up apologizing every time because it's the morning and I'm always like coughing or sniffing. Whatever. I'm old. Anyway, apologies. So borderline personality disorder, right? They may sometimes be able to kind of empathize, but they have an extreme level of narcissism. You can imagine if you have that severe, if your emotional experiences are that painful and so severe that you must manipulate, or you might even kill your own kids in order to avoid abandonment. Well, that is by definition narcissistic. It's an extreme level of narcissism. And so borderlines are barely capable of empathy at all. They're only feeling what they feel. In fact, they're not even that empathetic to self. They're just completely overwhelmed by their emotional experiences. Their emotional experiences are entirely out of control, and their emotional experiences control them and drive them. And so without going deeper into, right, the subtleties of borderline personality disorder, right? So that person is locked into that experience without some serious help. DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy developed by Marsha Linehan, is a really brilliant way of approaching that and really helping folks get emotional regulation. But without going more deeply into that, you can see that just having emotions doesn't mean crap for actually being empathetic. A borderline struggles terribly with any kind of empathy at all. They're just trying to emotionally save themselves. And the only way to emotionally save themselves is to manipulate whoever their attachment object is. So that attachment object is experiencing no empathy. The borderline is super like idealizing of them and loving and validating as long as they're useful. But the second they fail to validate the borderline and make the borderline feel safe, which is almost impossible to consistently do, that borderline will absolutely torture them emotionally, verbally, will physically do things that don't threaten the borderline, right? If they can get away with hitting, kicking, blocking, their partner, throwing things at their partner, screaming, making the environment extremely unsafe, threatening their own life. That's not empathy. They're not empathizing with their partner. They're just nice when it serves them, and they torture their partner when it serves to possibly bring the partner back into line with being their emotional grounding, their emotional foundation, right? So I'm using the borderline, who has very extreme emotional experiences, to demonstrate to you that having an emotional experience and being willing to emotionally express it doesn't mean shit for empathy. That does not mean that you're empathetic, right? So to come to the point that was the original inspiration for, I think, podcast 38, women are not more empathetic than men, in defense of women as normal human beings, was to say that possibly part of the reason, besides the fact that we abuse women by hyper idealizing them and forcing them into an ideal where they're supposed to be more nurturing and more empathetic, but we then demonize the women who don't meet that when they could be a great contribution to our society. In addition to that, I think it's also that we socialize women to be emotionally more expressive than men, and we equate emotional expression with empathy, but that's complete bullshit. Again, with the borderline as a demonstration of emotions and emotional expression doesn't have shit to do with empathy. In fact, some of the most emotionally expressive people absolutely entirely lack empathy. All they're doing is just blasting their emotional discomfort all over the place and using it to manipulate and force people into being caregivers for them, because the people who can't escape them, it's excruciating to put up with the intensity of that emotional expression, and it becomes a coping skill for the borderline. That's their animal coping skill, is I just blast my environment with this intensity of emotional distress. And it's so uncomfortable for the people in that environment that they end up problem solving or reassuring me or lying, like whatever the fuck it takes to end this intensity. And then that becomes the borderline's coping mechanism. Emotional expression has little correlation to empathy. Okay, so what is empathy? Having an emotional experience when you watch someone else suffer can be sympathy. Oh, I identify with you. You're part of my tribe. We have the same political bent. Or I was an abandoned child and I see, once I grow up and get past it, I see a child who's being neglected by their parents and I feel just terrible sadness. That's sympathy. I'm feeling what you feel. I may or may not do something about it, but sympathy has a limit, a serious limit, because when I don't identify with somebody, what does that mean? I don't give a shit, right? We had this conversation about like, oh, human beings' problem with, oh, cute animal, it's a puppy dog. The reason we're full of crap is because it's self-serving. We're like, well, I can identify with a dog because they have an expressive face and they emotionally express the way humans do. Therefore, I'll protect them, but I'll torture the shit out of a crab. Well, you're an asshole. That's not kind. That's not empathetic. That's not moral. That's just you going, oh, it bothers me to see an animal, a dog suffer. Therefore, I'll save myself and make myself comfortable by protecting the dog, but I don't identify with a crab, so you can do whatever the hell you want to. You can drop a lobster in a boiling water. I don't give a shit. Well, that's sociopathic. Don't kid yourself. That's some bullshit right there. You're not a caring, loving, or empathetic person because you identify with something and you're like, well, I would feel terrible if that happened to me. Therefore, I don't want it to happen to this thing that I identify with. No, being kind and loving and compassionate, being empathetic means I'm capable of having a theory of mind, having a theory of understanding of something that I don't identify, and just seeing that as a living being struggling for life, that's very difficult. And if I do have feelings of disturbance or or you might have feelings of inspiration to go, oh, I can contribute to the situation and alleviate the suffering. And it's not about me. It's not about alleviating my physical discomfort or my discomfort. It's about choosing as a conscious sentient being to alleviate the suffering of another conscious sentient being. So it may involve emotions, but they're much more subtle. Now, if you feel sympathetic and that inspires you to do something, don't get overly black and white and be like, well, I'm doing it for the wrong reasons. No, great, do it. You know, who cares why? If someone went through homelessness and they deeply sympathize with other homeless people and they end up making millions of dollars and they create a homeless program out of sympathy, awesome, great, do it. Because the homeless people you're helping don't give a shit what your motivation is. They just care that they got a warm meal and a warm place to sleep, right? But this is going back to the original argument that we've created this argument that women are more empathetic than men. Partially it comes from that we unfairly idealize women and force them into a stereotype, but partially it comes to we socialize women to be more comfortable with emotional expression. And we're like, oh, well, they're emotionally expressive, therefore they're empathetic. No, they're not. Being emotionally expressive doesn't have shit to do with being empathetic. Being empathetic means I can look at someone in front of me. Let me go back to an example I've used before. I was crossing the street back to my office, and there was a young homeless man who had a staff with a metal tip on it, so could potentially be dangerous. And he was really twitchy. You could see he had chronic severe PTSD, some real discomfort. He had behaved kind of aggressively towards someone, and he was standing back from the edge of the sidewalk, but it was a sidewalk I had to step up onto. And without paying attention, he sort of stepped forward across the street at the same time as I stepped up on the sidewalk, and I came into what I'm sure felt like his social space. And he was really twitchy. I think he had PTSD, and he sort of like jerked and turned sideways, and I think that angered him that he had this feeling, and he slammed that staff into the sidewalk and was like, "Get the fuck away from me." Now, my emotional response was the emotional response of a human animal and maybe a man and maybe testosterone, which was, there was this momentary response of like, A, I didn't come near you. You stepped towards me more than I stepped towards you. B, I might look old, but don't get confused. I'll beat the fuck out of you if like, okay, that's just stupid, whatever, it's posturing. I'm not a violent person, but that was my emotional response. That was my emotional response. What does that have to do with empathy? Nothing. That's for me. That's just my animal response. That was my first reaction. And I sort of calmed myself. And I was proud of myself because by the time I got to the door, which is like literally a tenth or a quarter of a block, I felt for him a subtle sort of caring and a wishing for his well-being and an understanding that what he had done was not personal, that I had not done anything wrong, but I had accidentally entered what probably felt like his social space, which probably for people with PTSD, their social space becomes their personal space because their nervous system is so uncomfortable and so twitchy and so hyper reactive that it feels like an attack when people come into your social space unless they've really, really made sure you're okay with it. So I had an understanding, and out of that understanding, I felt love and compassion for him as a human. It didn't change that I had the emotional reaction I had. So the empathy is much more subtle and is maybe like an 80% dose of understanding. Having a theory of mind, having a theory of someone else's experience, just that, 80% just an understanding, And then having a very quiet, deep sense of compassion and love for that person that's not an emotional response. Like, oh my God, that's so terrible. I feel so bad. Like, bullshit. That's not empathy. That's just emotional expression. It is more about you than it is about the other person. Right? I didn't go back and do anything for that guy. It would not have been a smart move. And, you know, he was already probably activated in response to me. That would not have been kind or empathetic. My job was to walk away, to remove myself from his area, and for him to get a chance to feel like he had the power to defend himself, and it made something abrasive or intrusive go away, and I was that. That's empathetic, right? So I did that. Empathy is like 80% just understanding and having a theory of mind and a theory of someone else's experience, and then having a sense of compassion and love for them as a living, sentient, experiencing being. It isn't about how intense, right? When you see a commercial and you have kids and it's a phone commercial about a dad picking up the phone to call his daughter, and it's really well done commercial, and you end up getting a little choked up and a tear runs out of your eye, that's not empathy. That's sympathy. Again, nothing wrong with it. You're a human, I'm a human. We tend to have feelings about things that we identify with, and feeling compassion and love and a desire for connection is probably healthier maybe than feeling rage or like whatever, or separation. But the fact that you feel that way doesn't mean that you're necessarily empathetic in that moment. You're sympathetic. You're having an emotional reaction because you have a situation like that and you see it for what it is, right? I forget the name of the movie. It was with Sandra Bullock, and where they adopted a homeless young man who was very big and very smart, and ended up playing football and being this phenomenal player, and you know, whatever, but his life was very hard and very, very sad. And I have a friend who was a very big man, who also had lived through pretty difficult childhood or whatever. And when we watched that movie, he cried, right? Nothing wrong with that. That's beautiful, but that's sympathy, right? He sees himself in that character. There's these similarities and this emotion comes up. Empathy is 80% having a theory of mind, being driven by a deep compassion, caring, and love for life. That means that when a dog is skinned alive in China for the dog meat festival, and a crab is alive and you're ripping the shell off of it while it's still alive because people want to eat it fresh, and the man who skins the dog, whose wife is dying of cancer and whose children left, you have a feeling of love and care for those living beings. All of them. It might be harder to get in touch with it for the man because he's inflicting terrible suffering on the dog. And in this country, we have a deep sympathy for dogs. And some of us have empathy for dogs. But if you feel stronger about that dog's suffering than you do about the crab's suffering, pardon me for saying so, but you're full of crap. That's not empathy. That's not kind. let's just say you misunderstand what compassion is. You're like, well, it's cute, therefore it deserves my compassion. Compassion is a state of being and understanding that all living things struggle and suffer, and having a sense of value and care and love for living beings such that you seek to do no harm and to not torment or hurt other living beings, and to sense to an attempt to intercede in order to alleviate. That's empathy, compassion. I can empathize with the man who skins the dog, even though I have a deep hatred for the behavior and for the ignorance that allows someone to do that to another living being. And before you get all morally superior, my dad was a biochemist who went into slaughterhouses. Believe me, we routinely torture animals to feed their bodies into our food systems. And when I'm saying this, I'm someone who eats meat. I'm full of shit too. I'm full of crap too. I'm just not interested in lying about it. I'm not interested in pretending that it's anything other than it is. Eating mass-produced meat is signing off on torture. If you eat veal and make some joke about, well, blah, blah, yeah, you're full of shit. You're okay torturing something as long as you don't identify with it. You don't have empathy. You're closer to the borderline than you are to an empathetic person. And that may be true of me, right? If I eat meat sometimes, I enjoy a burger every once in a while. I'm not checking to see where that burger comes from. That's a different podcast. I won't even go into really what they're doing to animals in order to mass produce meat. Like, I'm not doing that this podcast. So, trying to take this with a dose of my own humility. I'm full of crap too. I hurt things too. I am part of a system that tortures animals too. But let's not lie about what empathy is. If you don't give a shit about the crab, and if you hate and wish to inflict torment and suffering on the man who skins a dog alive, if you're like, fuck him, let's do it to him, you don't have empathy. You have sympathy for the dog, which just means you identify with the dog because it has an emotionally expressive face, and you're raised in a country in which we humanize dogs, blah, blah. That's sympathy, okay, but there's a severe limit on it. Because if you're okay torturing a crab and torturing the man who tortures the dog, I'm also sociopathic. I'm also engaging in and resorting to sociopathy, which is an ability to compartmentalize the suffering of creatures that I don't identify with, and to go, well, that doesn't matter. We'll even lie and say, well, it's not actually suffering. You're full of crap. Yes, it is. It's as horrible as the suffering of the dog. If I tortured that man, his suffering is as horrible as the suffering of the dog. My ability to inflict it is as immoral and sick and sociopathic as his ability to compartmentalize the suffering of the dog. Empathy is probably at least 80% the ability to understand what another living life form is experiencing and dealing with, and to even accept that it expresses it. And just go, okay, it's expressing something that appears like extreme distress. I am not going to inflict that. I'm going to alleviate it if I can. And maybe I don't have a lot of strong emotion. I'm just not interested in torturing things. because I have a deep, profound respect for all life. That's empathy. The thing that white people in this country struggle with in relationship to black people in this country, where it's always so legalistic and so transactional. Or so performative. If you're left-leaning, there's all of these expressions of like, oh, it's so terrible and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, shut up. If you haven't done anything about it, shut up. And I haven't, other than I just seek to just be human with other humans. That's it. That's all I've offered. I am not a moral authority in any situation. Empathy means a kindness and a compassion and an understanding for those things that we do not identify with and that we do not have an instinctive understanding because they don't look like us, act like us, don't attach value to the same things. Empathy would be on the night of 9/11, or the morning, sorry, of 9/11, as an American, we had very strong emotional reactions. That's sympathy for self. We identify with ourselves. It's our right to have that. I'm not arguing that we all become Buddhist monks. Yes, do, but whatever. Live your life. On that same night, if you could have gone, man, there are some very, very good Muslim families that are going to have a really hard time, and I bet they're really scared right now. And that matters to me. Compassion for them as living beings matters to me. That's empathy. In that moment, I might not identify with them at all. In that moment, I might be angry at their religion. I might be angry at the politics from the Muslim world. I might feel incredibly defended. I might feel ready to kill the enemy of my country. And if the enemy of my country happens to be a Muslim extremist, then that is what it is. But empathy is in the midst of my super strong emotions, knowing that there are millions of good Muslim people who might believe things that I find offensive and might behave in ways that I don't agree with, maybe in relationship to gender, whatever, or maybe they think my religion's full of crap, whatever, like whatever it is. Empathy is going, they are living beings who want to exist and thrive, and that's important, and I don't want them to suffer. I don't want them to suffer. I don't want to inflict suffering on them. I may be forced to, or my government may be forced to inflict death and suffering on the extremists who attacked my country. But empathy is the ability to recognize the life force and the presence and the experience of being alive in all things. Logic tells you there's no other way, because as soon as you get into identification with a group, it's not empathy, it's sympathy. And that's more self-serving. It's like, I would feel this way and you look like me and you act like me and you believe what I do, therefore I give a shit about what you experience. You know, that's not really caring, that's a caring about me. That's caring about me. And if there's more people like me, that makes me feel safer and I feel connected and that feels good. I'm sure that there's empathy mixed into sympathy sometimes. I don't want to black and white it, but I'm describing it in more black and white terms because there's confusion about that. So to put a pin in it, I didn't want to make another longer episode. The point that I forgot to make, the point that inspired podcast number 38, in defense of women as normal human beings was that part of the reason that society probably is constantly trying to tell men that women are more empathetic than men is because we socialize women to be more emotionally responsive and emotionally expressive. But having emotions and being emotionally responsive or expressive has no direct correlation with empathy at all, as demonstrated by the borderline who spends most of his or her life in a sociopathic state without any empathy whatsoever for any other living beings, where even things that appear sympathetic are self-serving and are meant to manipulate someone into taking care of the borderline. Emotional expression is no indication of compassion. I think about those situations in really annoys me, those situations in emergencies or whatever, where there are people, sometimes women, standing on the side going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It's like, you're contributing nothing. In fact, you make it harder for anyone to actually alleviate death or suffering. In fact, you are a problem in the situation. You are contributing to the problem. You're not empathetic. The fact that you go, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, contributes nothing. You are a problem. Drives me freaking nuts. Do something, or actually direct your behavior in like, you call the police, call an ambulance. I'm going to do this. Go get some like do something that actually alleviates suffering. Otherwise, you're just some animal screaming, going like, I'm overwhelmed, I'm overwhelmed, I'm overwhelmed. Yeah, well, it's not about you, is it? If you were not the victim of the situation. You see, emotional expression is so often nothing more than a human animal completely making it about them. Emotional expression and the willingness to express emotions does not make you empathetic. All right. Enough said. I really enjoy these subjects. And there are lots of women who are empathetic. I don't do these to take away from women as humans. I do this to take us all out of the bullshit boxes that we put one another in. We idealize one another because it serves society and we're getting something and it's transactional. We demonize one another because we want someone to crap on. And our only way forward is to knock it off and just take each human being and listen to them and watch how they present, and to spend 80% of our time just having an understanding, a theory of mind, a pretty decent guess on what they're experiencing and when they're suffering, if we can alleviate the suffering, to do so. If we have emotions about it, great. You have emotions about it. That's wonderful. The being part of being alive is experiencing our emotions. I'm a therapist. I'm not arguing about that. I'm just saying that that doesn't have any direct correlation to empathy. Let's listen to one another. Forget about gender, sexuality, race, religion. Just listen to each individual, pay attention, and when they appear to be suffering, check in and be like, hey, are you okay? And if they're a living being that doesn't talk, use your empathy, your compassion, your ability to imagine what they're going through to see if you can alleviate their suffering, and then see if they start to display the behaviors of satisfaction and thriving and comfort that seems to be obvious in all living beings. It seems to be obvious in all living beings. Just start there. Coolio, Fulio? All right. Love you guys. Talk to you next time. Take care.
Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.